Hello and welcome to the Krackle Comics Holiday Special, issue 47. This is our special show for this year. Obviously, last week we wrapped up new comics for the year of 2020. We'll be back with that in 2021, but we thought we'd do one more episode of talking about some of our favorite or maybe new discoveries of holiday issues. And also, we're joined by a guest.
What's up? Ginger Dan here.
Ginger Dan has returned, and I think the only time in canon that you've been on Krackle was when we talked about Green Arrow.
No, he
Maybe.
was in the videos where we tried to establish definitive writers and artists.
Oh,
I
yeah.
forgot we did those.
That is a thing I stayed up very late for.
Yep.
I forgot we even did those. And I'm pretty sure if you can watch Dan falling asleep in those.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought I fell asleep live on air with those.
Wouldn't be the first time.
That's some good content.
But each of us have chosen, well, we went by pages, so each of us chose about 80 pages for ourselves, and then same rules as when we were doing the retro books back when no new books were coming out. We designated one for everyone has to read this, but more people read more than necessarily others on some things. But for the first round, I'll go to Vince for Marvel Team Up number 1 from 1972.
Yes. This is the first issue of this series, written by Roy Thomas, art by Ross Andru. This is Spider-Man's second ongoing title at the time, and it seems that there may have been like an unwritten rule about the editor-in-chief writing this book, because it kind of jumps through like Roy Thomas, like a little stretch of R.J. Goodwin, I think, and then like Jerry Conway eventually and things like that. And then it, doesn't do that thing. I think it's just coincidence, but it's always seemed weird to me. But it kicks off here with Roy Thomas establishing that trend. And this is the same month as Amazing Spider-Man 106. So this is at the very, very tail end of Stan Lee's run. Pete is on the job taking photos of people swimming in the freezing ocean. I don't entirely understand this part. I guess it's like some like dumb like Iron Man type of like athletic feat thing. It's like, oh, people are going to go swim in the cold ocean. I don't think it's referencing like any particular event or anything like that. And then they're at the beach with sand everywhere. So Sandman pops up, and he has this dumb costume of this era where he has like this weird like mechanical suit and it's green. It's really, I actually kind of like it. I think it's kind of underrated, but it's very much the Jack Kirby Sandman rather than the Steve Ditko Sandman. So he and Spidey get in a quick fight, and then Sandman runs away. And the team up comes in because, as I was talking about his costume, this is actually only the second time Spidey has faced Sandman, I believe, in terms of publication order. I'm sure he appeared in some issue of Untold Tales or something like that, retroactively. But that's because basically after Spidey like went up against him, he became a Fantastic Four villain, and he was a member of the Frightful Four. And the Frightful Four, the like very first iteration, or maybe it's the second iteration, it's a weird mix because it includes Paste Pot Pete, who was also originally a Spidey villain, I think, or maybe he was technically in the Human Torch Strange Tales book. But it had Sandman, and then it had Medusa, who appeared before the rest of the Inhumans, and Medusa in kind of a villainous role, which is slightly relevant to a book we're going to talk a lot later about. But so Spidey goes to grab his friend, the Human Torch, to help out because it's Sandman. And Johnny is having issues with Crystal, so he's all bummed and kind of Scrooging it up here. And the twist is that Sandman, it's odd. He like doesn't realize that it's Christmas Eve, and then like in their like antics in their repartee when fighting, someone Spidey mentions it, and he's like, "Oh shit!" So it turns out the twist is that he is visiting his sick mother for the holiday to, check in with her, and Spidey even hands him a little gift. I'm not sure where he got that from. I think it was something maybe he was going to give MJ, and they cut him a deal to let him talk to his mom, and then they're going to haul him into the cops. But of course, he gets away. He slinks down the sink drain, so they see a couple grains of sand. And this is probably the first instance of making Sandman more of a sympathetic character. I think this is really fun. It's a dated comic in some ways. It's Roy Thomas, but I think it's enjoyable, and it's a nice little first issue as well.
I would agree in the sense that it's fun, and it is, you noted the sympathetic tendencies that we see for Sandman here. Obviously my mind immediately goes to Spider-Man 3 of I have a daughter, she's sick, yada yada yada, the meme line. But no, this works. The costume's terrible, but I also don't think Ross Andrews' pencils were that great here. There's a couple times where Spider-Man's mask is messed up with the line work on it, on the pattern, which is uncharacteristic for Ross Andrew. So I don't know if this was an off day for him or not, but it's a fine issue. And then I've never been the big fan of Roy Thomas's writing translating from then to now. So there's obviously a couple hiccups here, but for the most overall part for me, it actually flows better than maybe some other Roy Thomas things I've read.
Yeah, I mean the only other things I really have to comment on with this is with the suit too. I don't know if you noticed it. I guess if it was just like a coloring issue or whatever, but like his eye slits are also like the color of his flesh. So like I feel like those should be white, kind of like Batman's or other DC heroes. And then you mentioned as well the issues that the Human Torch is having with Crystal. I mean, who doesn't have issues with Crystal in relationships, right? So I thought that was kind of funny to include there. But yeah, otherwise, this is pretty much a typical Spider-Man issue from the 70s.
I wouldn't really say I have anything to add that hasn't already been said, other than I don't know if I'm just not very familiar with like early Johnny and Spidey dynamics, but they felt more like purely antagonistic than two guys just kind of like ribbing on each other.
I don't think they've
issue.
met that many times at this point. Again, I'm sure there's tons of retconned appearances. But like obviously there's the moment where Spidey tries to join the Fantastic Four because he thinks he'll get paychecks from them. And I think Spidey appeared in an issue of the solo Human Torch stories, and I think that's like very subtly referenced here. In fact, I'd just add, just in addition to some of the comments you guys said, yeah, this is like a year or two off from Andrew joining on Amazing, so he's here before there. But it's not like he's young or anything. I mean, he was, he had a 10-year run pretty much on Wonder Woman before coming to Marvel. Drew the Metal Men, which we read for some retro. But I don't know, it could be a mix of inking and colors and deadlines, who knows. I think the first splash page, because this is back in the era where the first page always has to be a splash page, I think that's fantastic. And I think the final panel with Torch, lighting up the message in the sky, I think that's actually like pretty iconic actually, in Marvel stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, and then to Dan's Crystal note, I'll just say that Johnny's having issues with Crystal here, but later he's going to get cucked by Quicksilver.
What a way! We're in the first book in the show, and you have to go there. It's the holiday episode, after all. Oh, geez. All right, it's gonna be a long night. But I'll go into my choice for the next one, which is DC Special Series number 21. This is from 1980, and I chose the Batman story here by Dennis O'Neil, and then Frank Miller and Steve Mitchell. Now, I chose this mostly because of the creative team. So first for Frank Miller drawing Batman, and then this obviously has to be, we have his prolific work with Dark Knight Returns that happens in 1986. So this is 6 years before that. So seeing Frank draw Batman, and not his more box and square style that he has in that, but is more, at least I would interpret as a more fluid and energetic style with Daredevil, is more of a rare treat for me. And I thought I would obviously force you guys to read it. Plus, paired with Batman Master Dennis O'Neil is an automatic treat for, any Batman fan, but any comics fan should take a look at this, I believe. Story is fairly simple, as Batman is tracking down a mobster, and then there's like a small-time crook who's been roped into robbing a store dressed as Santa because he shares a likeness, and then he gets caught in the crossfire. So Batman obviously has to save him. The fight choreography here is very much in line with Miller's Daredevil work, especially in the panel breakdowns and layouts on the page, and then also makes great use of the department store setting as Batman he kind of makes use of a bunch of different items inside the store for weapons. Example, he throws a mini Christmas tree right at a dude's face, and of course, while humorous, Miller makes it look great. So I thought it was pretty good. So I'll open it up to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I love the shot where the guy tries to whack him tries to punch him in the abs, and Batman's just like, that's nothing. Try again. And yeah, like you said, I mean, the panel layouts for Miller here is just very reminiscent of Daredevil, and it's very, very dynamic. And yeah, that panel with the guy getting whacked with the tree, that really stood out to me. Yeah, not really much else to add. Really great choice here, Mike.
Yeah, this is fun. I just want to since this is an anthology book and we picked one story, I want to give a shout out to the cover by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, which is really fantastic. And because this, it is by Frank Miller, but obviously the rest of Frank Miller's Batman work is very distinct. Year One, Dark Knight Returns, this doesn't really super conveniently fit with either of those. So oftentimes, you don't necessarily have this in your collection, even if you're a huge Frank Miller or Batman fan and you're going for, collected editions. So it's a interesting, slightly obscure story.
Yeah. Did your Dan anything to add on this one?
Not really. Just a nice little 8-page story. Just Batman fighting a dude in a department store.
And it's drawn by Frank Miller. So
yeah, that as well.
All right. And then we'll go to you.
All right. So the story I'm going to be talking about is the New Gods story from DCU's first Holiday Bash in 1997. It's written by Walt Simonson, who would, of course, later go on to write and draw a 25-issue Orion series. And the art is provided by Sal Buscema. And the title is A High Father Christmas. There's a space in between High and Father. It's a wonderful little 9-pager from, like I said, Simonson and Buscema. And the story is following High Father and Orion as they're spending Christmas Eve in New York City. And they get mistaken, mostly High Father, for a department store Santa by this very high-strung manager. And High Father is just like, yeah, let's go along with it. Why not? Orion, of course, is like not really game, but High Father convinces him, do it for the kids, not for the department store, or for the guy, or for us even. Let's do it for this line of kids that's out there waiting for Santa. So Orion agrees. High Father uses his magic to make himself fat so he actually looks like Santa. And Orion actually takes off his mother box's imaging technology that he always uses on his face, and interestingly decides to call himself a Christmas gnome, which I thought was kind of funny, but also exceptionally weird. But it works out very well. High Father uses his powers to know the children's names, and Orion has this giant sack of toys, with a specific toy picked out for each child, and it's very, very, Santa and Christmassy. And at the end of the night, High Father gives out the last present to the department store manager, which is a Santa hat, and this kind of mellows out the high-strung guy. He gives everyone just go home early, and the actual Santa eventually shows up, and he's just like, don't worry about it, I'll make sure you get paid. And the gift that the department store manager got was a Santa hat, so he kind of starts thinking, maybe next year I'll be Santa. And it's just a nice little turn for him, mellowing out and being more in the Christmas spirit. Overall, very nice little short story. Highly recommend if you didn't have a chance to read it.
Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say I liked it, and Simonson with Buscema is an interesting pairing that I actually liked.
Yeah, I would just want to say I love 90s Sal Buscema. If you watch our old Clone Saga show, there's plenty of debate and discussion about that. And I also I'm curious if this has been reprinted anywhere, because again, there's kind of a pattern here where oftentimes you'll have these holiday stories or these anthology stories by creators that are associated with certain characters or runs, but then mostly at DC they forget to pull this in. So like I don't know that this is in collections of Simonson's Orion. I'm not sure if time-wise maybe it fits more with the John Byrne stuff, but it's not getting put in there because Byrne's not here at all. So I would definitely, I think the Holiday Bash issues, and I think we have multiple stories through them. They're definitely worth tracking down.
Yeah, from what I remember, this isn't in the Orion omnibus. I don't know if they, for some strange reason, put it in maybe like the trades they put out. I don't know. It's also kind of interesting. You'd think if at some point or another DC or Marvel would just put out like a trade or like even a whole omnibus or whatever of just like, here's all our Christmas stories, or like here's all our Christmas anthology stories.
DC's actually done a trade or two in that vein. I'm not sure when they did it last.
They were at least doing with the Walmart super specials. They were doing seasonal ones there, which is, I actually got the one last year, and there was a story reprinted in there that I'll talk about on the show later. But I mean, just isolating Holiday Bash, there's 3 issues. There's no reason why they couldn't just put out a trade paperback of just call it the DCU Holiday Bash collection, in which I will also say we have at least a story from all 3 issues in there on this show tonight, which I do also find interesting as well. But Dan, you're going to talk about the famous Kyle Baker cover.
Yes. So our next issue is Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, number 112, written by Peter David with art by Mark Beecham. So it's Christmas Eve in New York City, and our issue opens to Spidey stopping a robber who ends up getting away. Later on, Peter goes to the Daily Bugle to find out there are no photo assignments for him, as Joy Mercado, of all people, see if anyone here actually knows who she is, kisses him under the mistletoe. So Pete's really feeling down on this Christmas Eve. He doesn't really know. He's kind of like pretty much by himself. He calls Aunt May and kind of hangs up on her as he abruptly leaves the Bugle to head home to his apartment, where he's kind of just killing time. We then get some montage of him calling Mary Jane, hanging up before before he goes to voicemail. Mary Jane wanted to call Pete. Black Cat wanted to call Pete and all that stuff, and she kind of lets some stress off and dresses up in the Black Cat outfit and goes fighting some criminals. So everyone's kind of alone on Christmas Eve, I guess. Meanwhile, we discover that Randy, who is Joe Robertson's son, he's actually having a delay on his flight, and he's bringing his wife home for the holidays. So, and we get some commentary there. This is 1986, but we get some commentary that Randy's wife is white, and obviously he's black. So there's a little bit of apprehension, I guess, with him, introducing his wife to his father. So for what that's worth, I guess, something to kind of keep track of. But the main story, the main point of this, this cover that kind of alludes to is the Santa thief. We have a thief that breaks into Peter's apartment, actually the apartment next door, which forces Peter to jump into action. At this point, he's still wearing the symbiote suit. So he fights with the Santa. The Santa ends up running up to the roof of the apartment building and actually disappears, where Peter can't find where he went. So next day, Peter runs into a Santa, like a normal Santa, and finds out that the thief Santa was tied up with a note that says that he should go see Aunt May. And so the end of the issue kind of has Pete stopping by on Christmas morning to spend time with Mary Jane, Aunt May, and Anna Watson. And then I guess outside as well, we get some kind of shady guys who are plotting revenge. But I guess that will have to wait for another time. So I guess they do have a heart on Christmas Day, of all things criminals do. So I thought this was an interesting issue. Obviously, I think a few years back, someone submitted this for a Cool Cover Friday, as we mentioned before going on air. So it was kind of interesting to go back and just read the issue for what it's worth. It's pretty much what you expect with a Spectacular Spider-Man issue. There's a lot of Black Cat in here. There's some other background characters that people might not be familiar with, but I thought it was all right. I mean, at least it's Christmas oriented, so that's what our theme's about, right? Or holidays, excuse me. So, what did you guys think? Anyone else read this or no?
Yeah, I did. We have a bunch of Spider-Man on the show, and we have a bunch of Batman, which is kind of what you'd expect on any kind of themed show. Mostly pulling from Marvel and DC. So I think I'm surprised you didn't comment a little bit more on the art, because Mark Beecham is very pin-uppy, and like even more so than what you'd think of like stereotypical in the 90s or something like that. MJ is in a bathtub in this issue. Black Cat gets undressed from her street clothes and then dressed in her costume. And even the three neighbor girls, Bambi, Candy, and whatever, they're in their leg warmers and in some certain poses. It's full of cheesecake, but I kind of love it. Like, it's not like there are panels here that like people would totally cringe at. But it like doesn't take itself seriously, and it's not like so exploitative. I kind of love it. This is the era where Christopher Priest was editing the Spider-Man books, and there's a lot of like non-traditional moves like that. Like Kyle Baker does the cover here, and he was, I believe, inking Web of Spider-Man in the beginning or something like that. And I think this is an interesting era for Spidey. And I believe there's references to the black suit in here as well. Or is he wearing it? I don't even. I don't think he is, but it's in here. In fact, the story's solid. It's Peter David. Like, this is really, great Peter David. There's lots of little scenes and character moments with emotion and a lot of quick comedy, jokes. And the nerdy comment that I'll make is there's a footnote here which refers to Marvel Tales number 182 instead of Amazing Spider-Man number 42. And that's really interesting because, of course, Marvel Tales reprinted Spider-Man from the beginning. So I guess maybe they thought this was just like barely in that era where like the back issue market isn't huge, or maybe they realized that, hey, that's a key issue. It's going to be impossible for people to track down. So they're like, pick up Marvel Tales. There's also a New Coke reference, which I think is funny. And our next story here is one of mine, and this is from Christmas with the Superheroes number 2, which is basically, we've already talked about these the Holiday Bash issues. So Christmas with the Superheroes was 2 issues in the late 80s, though I believe the first one is entirely a reprint. This is a Deadman story by Alan Brennert and Dick Giordano. And this is pretty cool because Brennert, kind of through the 80s, he would dip in and out of random DC stories. It's like he never had a run on anything, but basically everything he did in comics is amazing. There's a lot of really famous Batman stories that he did, involving Earth 2 and Catwoman and things like that. And so Boston Brand, aka Deadman here, he needs to do some Christmas shopping for some of his friends. So we enter just the endlessly ethically confusing life of Deadman. So he takes over the body of this rich scumbag who makes his living buying up and tearing apart businesses, and basically just uses this guy's credit card. And then he mopes about. He's all depressed because being dead, the holidays aren't very exciting. But also he doesn't want to hang out with the few people he does know because, again, he's dead, and that weirds up their holiday. And he possesses a woman ice skating, which is a little weird, but it gets even weirder when he possesses a man who's on a date with his girlfriend and ends up at their Christmas party and then escapes from the man's body, which, every time you escape someone and has been possessing them for quite a while, person's weirded out, of course. So he gives that up because he realizes, hey, I'm being a creep. And he comes across a mysterious blonde woman who can somehow see him and talk to him, which is usually not the thing with Deadman. So he kind of is angsty towards her, and she's kind of going back and forth with him on some philosophical stuff. And as they part at the end of the story, the woman shares her name, and it's Kara, which doesn't mean anything to Deadman. And that's kind of a cool extra layer of the twist. So this is, of course, Supergirl, who died during Crisis. And so I guess that's how she can talk to Deadman. And then the story is dedicated to Otto Binder and Jim Mooney, two of the most prominent Supergirl creators. So that's really nice. I think this is really beautiful stuff. Like I said, Brenner, his stories are they both, this story both pulls in like the classic like kind of Christmas storytelling. It's similar to A Christmas Carol or It's a Wonderful Life, that kind of thing. But you also have this nerdy continuity angle where it's very much entrenched and fan service for DC fans, but in an emotional way. So yeah, I would also recommend people track down, especially this second issue of Christmas with the Superheroes.
I completely didn't key in when I read this. This was 89, so I was a little bit wondering why we weren't going to ever see her in costume. But then once you pointed that out, that makes perfect sense. And that is, that's really interesting that they kind of snuck her in there. But this is what, 4 years after she died. So, and then obviously we don't get a new Supergirl until what? Well, no, we'll get Matrix in the 90s, but Kara won't come back until
around
2005. No, this is really good stuff, though. I don't know if Dan and Ginger Dan. I don't think either of you guys read this, right?
Nope. But after the show, I'll probably sit down and read it because it does sound interesting to me.
Yeah,
though I did just spoil the entire story. But
yeah, I mean, but like,
yeah, and obviously it's
who cares?
All right, moving onwards. Superman Volume 2, number 64 from 1992. This is Dan Jurgens, Butch Geis on art. And I probably should have chosen this as my all read, but I went for the more, heavy art tease with the, Batman and Frank Miller. But this is Dan Jurgens just delivering a prime Superman story. It's December 23rd, and Superman and Lois are headed to the Metropolis post office to look through the letters to Superman, which are now so encompassing that it requires its own room for storage. So Superman, he's not, kind of in the attitude of like he doesn't really want to look through all this because he kind of knows that this is just going to be a bunch of business grift opportunities for him, but also on the other side of it, it's just going to be real depressing like notes for people that he really cannot help, and they don't know that Superman can't help them. But he tries to power through it and help the people he can, and he manages to reunite two sisters who that were separated in Auschwitz during the Holocaust. And then he gets a letter from a 10-year-old boy who draws him a picture, and then asking if he can save his father, who's dying from a brain tumor. So he jumps into action to go to them, and then he has to tell the kid who he gets there like 10 minutes after the father's passed away. And so he's like, Superman, why didn't you save my dad? And he's like, dude, I couldn't save him at all, but I enjoyed your picture. So he at least, gives him the lesson there. But he talks to the wife, and because he has another letter of a woman who's dying from heart failure. And, he tries to get it so if they can donate the heart, maybe they can save her, which they do. So he's able to save that. So Superman's able to do some help and inspire him to keep pushing through the holiday season. And then his last request he fulfills is a find from Lois as the Metropolis Orphanage asks to see Santa. So he calls up Bruce Wayne to get a toy donation as he heads to Star Labs, and helps Emil Hamilton build a sleigh and gets him to dress up as Santa and deliver gifts. And then Superman dresses back in all black to make the illusion that it really is Santa. So just a great issue all around. Plus Butch Geis is drawing about as perfect as a Superman you could get. Jurgens would, carry on these stories at least further, it seems, from other, bits and pieces I've read from, particularly in Funeral for a Friend, where the JLA has to try to pick up the slack on the letters in the year of his absence, because this is 92. Superman's going to die in about a year, because he'll die in 93, and they do make reference that Superman has proposed at this point as well. So this is really, really good. Great writing by Jurgens, and then great art by Butch Geis as well.
Yeah, I think this is really spectacular. I think I was really impressed by the Geis art. It's a nice mix of both, close to the Superman house style, which in this era is basically Dan Jurgens himself, but it's also matching the story's tone. It does feel a little bit more grounded, and more, fits the more emotional story. I like the one moment where this distinction is drawn between Superman and Superman, which doesn't come across as well speaking, or maybe it does better than on the page in bold. The one thing is, I think the part where he dresses all in black and helps the reindeers fly, I think that takes things a little bit too cartoony and slightly like off kilters the tone of this story. I would have been fine without that. Like, if you think about that realistically, which I know is pointless, but like those deer are freaking the hell out. Like, they're flying through the air in this guy in a weird suit. It's just so, it would be funny, and I think I think some of the kids would notice as well, but it doesn't matter. And then it was cool to see Professor Hamilton here, even though that scene, which is tied to the whole reindeer thing, is also really weird because it's like we take multiple pages to like have this like fake science discussion about how to create like an illusion of a sleigh. But it was cool to see him here because he's a really underrated supporting character in like this era of Superman in the 80s and 90s. And he started out as kind of like a minor villain, and then turns good. But then as you get into the 2000s, when I was reading Superman growing up, he gets like thrown around and more heel turns, and I think they kind of fucked up that character.
They do that in the animated series as well, where he's kind of a traitor as well. I don't know. I guess writers just hate Professor Hamilton, but he at least got to be played by Toby from The West Wing in Man from Steel.
So I also read this issue and very much liked it. This whole like 80s, 90s Superman is something I've never read much of, but in the past like year or two have slowly tried to read more of and have just found that I really like it a lot. And I hadn't read this issue before, so it was a very nice little treat for me. I do like, I know they bring it up in the issue itself, but it seems odd to me that Superman wouldn't, like check in on these letters like once a week or like once a month or something, because like it kind of happens in this issue as well, where he gets to the kid's dad too late, and granted there was nothing he could do, but like what happens if you write Superman in January? You just don't hear from him for almost a year, just out of luck. But it was nice. I feel like it would have been nice or like uplifting for Superman if one of the letters he reads that like we got to see was just someone saying like some kid or someone or whoever just saying like, "Hey Superman, you do great work. I look up to you. You're great." Yada yada yada. And it's just like not looking for a business proposition, not asking for help, just keep doing the work you're doing. Thanks. But like I said, overall, great story. Really nice seeing the more human side of Superman.
Yeah, I can see that. They at least make a reference to a lot of the letters are just kids drawing pictures to him.
Okay.
They had that, but no, I can definitely say like you could at least have also had some where it's just one or the other. It is interesting that the cover of this issue is him reading one of the letters, but it's the kid's name is different from in the issue. So I guess that's just a different letter he's reading on the cover than the one inside. But just to infer, but just something else I noted that was interesting. But we'll go to you, Ginger Dan, for Starman.
All right. So everyone on this podcast knows I really like Starman. So the story's name is Christmas Night. Obviously, it's written by James Robinson, and there's art by, I believe it's the guest artist for this, Steve Yoel. And this is, I think, a story I've read once a year since I first read Robinson's run on Starman. It's just like a really nice, simple little Christmas story. And upon rereading it for, I think, at least the third, maybe fourth time this year, noticed a few things that I either have since forgotten or re-remembered. But the plot's fairly simple. The O'Dares, which are part of Jack's supporting cast, are throwing a Christmas party, and this year they've invited Jack and his family. So it just starts out in their home, and eventually we are taken away to see Jack, who is on his way over to the party, but takes a detour to help out Santa, specifically someone who was a department store Santa, but he had gotten robbed. Someone stole his locket, which is basically the only thing he holds dear in this world because it contains the only remaining pictures of his wife and son who had died previously in a car accident. And after this, Santa turned to alcoholism and fell asleep with a lit cigarette. He burned down his house, which was getting foreclosed anyway, and he just doesn't have literally anything else from his wife and son. So the locket's very important for him, and Jack's just like, you know what, I'm gonna help you, Santa. So for the rest of the issue, we go back and forth between guests arriving at the O'Dares and Jack and Santa trying to track down the locket. So I'll just focus on like the Jack part of the story for now. Basically, he asks a couple of different homeless people, like, are you seeing this guy? Where he is, yada, yada, yada. And in the two instances where he talks to someone, he gives them money so that they can, get some food and maybe also like find a place to stay for the night because it's snowing, it's like Christmas time, cold and stuff, and people need to eat. So eventually they do find the guy that stole Santa's locket, but a shootout kind of happens at the pawn shop where the thief was going to sell it, and the pawn shop owner has been shot. Luckily, Santa was a medic in the Korean War, so he's able to save his life and, kind of make a difference. And as he and Jack are talking about that, Jack confesses, he's starting to get used to being a hero, which fits in with the larger narrative of Robinson's Starman. And then back at the O'Dares, people have arrived. Shade even stops by to casually gift a signed first edition of A Christmas Carol. But just as everyone's getting worried, like, oh, where's Jack? Like, oh God, did something happen to him? He's a superhero. We kind of forgot. He shows up, and he brought Santa because as Santa and Jack were about to part ways, Jack says, like, thanks for your help. You did a great job tonight, Santa. Santa, is leaving and says, yeah, thanks, you too. By the way, my name's Pete. And there's just this beautiful shot of Jack standing in the snow, just realizing how much of a dumbass he's been. Like, he just never even thought to ask this guy's name. He just called him Santa all night. And, like, he basically, like, risked his life next to him. And he's like, ah, shit. So he brings Santa to the party. And in the true spirit of Christmas, he's just welcomed immediately. And from what I can guess, because the story basically ends as the party is starting, a great time was had by all.
It's a perfect issue of arguably the best DC Comics run of all time.
Yeah, I think this is great. I'm a huge fan of Starman as well. I think what really stood out to me was that page in the snow. I don't know why. Like, maybe this doesn't make any sense, but it seems like a really interesting page to me because it's almost like a splash page, but it's not a splash page at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically devoting an entire page to just a stop, like slowing down time and also underlining the emotion and everything like that. And I'm kind of wondering, like, maybe this is reductive and maybe this is just me bullshitting, but like, in a different comic book, does the editor let this page get out the door? In a 22-page book or whatever. But thankfully, Starman was edited by the best comic book editor of all time, Archie Goodwin. So that's not a concern here. And yeah, I think this hits on a lot of the points of what's so strong about James Robinson on this book. Obviously, it's a fill-in artist or guest artist, really. So, it's not super in line with the art for the rest of the series, though it fits, tonally and in style for the most part. But you see, kind of the subtleties and the extra details that Robinson puts into his stories and the tiny little pokes of commentary or wit and things like that, like where Santa's like, yeah, I'm a veteran, I'm a homeless veteran, like we're all over the place. And it's like, that's fucked up. And then, you have, when he shows up, you have that camaraderie between the veterans. And I do actually like, when they did that, I didn't remember because technically, like, Starman 1 or whatever, the original Starman, Jack's father, is like technically sort of a veteran as well from World War II, but like kind of not. And I actually like how Robinson didn't go that angle, and I was almost trying to remember whether he did, where if he jumps into that conversation, it's like, I'm a veteran too. I fought the Ultra Humanite during World War II. I think it's actually nice that he didn't do that, even though it wouldn't really matter.
Right.
Yeah. Good stuff. Just to go back to the scene of Jack in the snow, just because that will forever like be burned in my mind. Like that is just like the page from this issue. You can just like really see his mind working. Like, oh shit. Like you can just see him like kind of snap inside. It's like, I've been not a good person, and it's just very powerful.
Yeah, it's I would say it's like not only just this, it's one of the best like just parts of the run, and kind of maybe from what I remember acts as kind of a turning point for Jack as well, where he does try to be better. This is, you know, what does this go to? 94, right? Is 94 the last issue? I can't remember.
80, 85, 80 something, I want to say.
So yeah, so I mean, obviously this is before he sets out on his journey through space. This really is kind of ending the first kind of segment almost, if you want to break it down into fourths maybe. But yeah, it's just a really, really good issue. And just, oh man, DC needs to make this run more widely available to people, because I know Dan wants to read it, but he can't.
I got the first two omnibus paperbacks, so I'm not sure if this goes up to that. Probably not.
I think it does.
Too.
I could pull the hardcover off my shelf real quick.
The first one's 0 through 17. I think each one's like 10 issues or something. So
I'll get back to you later, Dan.
Yeah, we'll get that one to you later. But Dan, you have been sitting here for a while, so you'll talk about your second pick.
Yeah, the second one that you can't even really count as a Christmas issue aside from the title. But anyways, our next issue is Fantastic Four number 325, written by the illustrious Steve Englehart with art by Rick Buckler. Our issue opens to the Silver Surfer finding the Human Torch's body on Mercury as he quickly heads towards Earth at the slight mention of Mantis, his former lover, still being alive. So pretty cool to see that. On Earth, the Thing and Miss Marvel say goodbye to Mantis as she uses a ship to head back to space. But before she can do that, the Silver Surfer shows up with the Human Torch, and Mantis and Silver Surfer are reunited. So pretty cool to see that. The two then plan to go on a mission to save Mantis's son from the Katati, who people who tune into our show during the summer might know as the group that was in the Empire event from this summer. So it's kind of cool to see them all the way back here in 1989. Suddenly, Kang shows up with the Katati on Earth and threatens to kill her son if they do not give up their quest to save him. So the heroes band together and stop Kang and the Katati. After the battle, Mantis sheds her mortal body in order to go after the Katati. So basically, she just passes out and like dies, I guess, or like, you know, leaves her conscious body behind. This upsets the Silver Surfer as he heads back towards the stars and just basically leaves our Earth heroes to kind of sit there and wonder. Merry Christmas, I guess. Like I said before, I don't know why this is considered a Christmas tale, aside from the fact that it's snowing during this issue. There's really not really many direct mentions, if any, towards Christmas. So aside from that, though, I thought this was a really good issue. I really did like Rick, his art. I thought it was pretty good to see that. I thought it was pretty good layouts, and I don't know. Kang is just one of those weird villains that I think always has these types of issues with fights. But anyways, I don't know if anyone else read this. I think Vince did. So
yeah, so I essentially assembled the grand pool of choices for this show, just kind of pulling things that I thought were Christmas stories. And I think I took the title of this story, which again is technically a Christmas tale, I obviously took that literally, and Dan made the unfortunate choice of choosing this. And I'm a little surprised he chose it, even with that curveball. But like you said, there's kind of some unexpected weird synergy since we read Empire this year. And this is it's a weird story too, because with Mantis involved, this is like Englehart following up on his '70s Avengers stories, and he's writing Silver Surfer at the same time. Also touches on Mantis and things like that. So it's a weird issue, and I don't know, Dan, did this make you excited or put off from reading more of Englehart's Fantastic Four?
Honestly, I feel like I am a little more enticed. I mean, the fact that he like Mantis is obviously a very complicated character in the Marvel lore of comics, but I don't know. I thought it was a pretty fun issue to read. A lot of action stuff going on. I don't know. There is an epic out for Steve Englehart's Fantastic Four,
Yeah.
right?
The first like half of it is an epic, and then there's a missing volume, and then like the very end of it is in another one.
Yeah, I mean, assuming it's not out of print, I might track it down.
It's a weird era for Fantastic Four because you also have She-Thing here and all kinds of weird stuff. But our next issue is the greatest Christmas story in comics ever told, the Lobo Paramilitary Christmas Special, written by Keith Giffen, Alan Grant, and art by Simon Bisley. This is basically the peak of Lobo. This is obviously, this is almost like an entire decade after his first appearances. His first appearance is in an issue of Omega Men, and then he's further developed in Legion, and he showed up and had his guest appearances in Justice League by this point. So this one shot fits between the first two miniseries, and basically those all combined, maybe one or two things, down the line later. That's basically where Simon Bisley was involved with the character. And as we get into the actual book, there's this wacky couple. The guy has an insane haircut. They're down and out on Christmas because the husband just got laid off his job, and they are drawing up their arms and planning because they expect that their children are going to try and kill them for not giving them the perfect Christmas. So they're going to take the initiative first and kill their own children. But they receive on their doorstep a mysterious book, and the book says, "Hey, read me to your kids, and it'll scare them off from the Christmas spirit, and it'll solve all your problems." And they're like, "Hey, let's check out this book, see what it's up to." And then within the book is the actual Lobo story, where he's at a bar and the Easter Bunny hires him to kill Santa Claus because Santa and Christmas, they're just taking up too much oxygen in the kind of pie chart of holidays. And Santa here is portrayed as a ruthless dictator. He's got a big factory. His elves are slaves. He brutally murders a bunch. Oh, and then he's also kinky. There's like a suggestion that he's a kinky, weird dude as well. So Lobo shows up. He brutally murders a bunch of elves, and like way more than you'd expect. There's some surprising gore here. He's punching their heads open and shooting them to bits. And even his dog gets in on the action. I'm a fan of Lobo's dog. And then he finally comes across Santa, and Santa kind of tempts Lobo into agreeing to a fair fight. So they pull out knives, and it's basically a knife fight. Lobo punches Santa's eyeball out of his head and then cuts off his head. And the penguins are very impressed. They want to join his gang, even though, and it's pointed out as a joke that the penguins are like, "We're not even from here. Like, we should maybe go back to Antarctica." But the penguins are really impressed and they want to join the Lobo gang. And Lobo discovers he basically, taps into Santa's naughty and nice list. And his idea is, let's just nuke the entire planet, everyone on the naughty and the nice list. And then we get back to the parents who are the framing device. And it turns out, twist, the book is good for one read only. So the book melts in their hands, and now they have to go kill their kids anyways. So Alan Grant and Keith Giffen, they're just fucking mad here. There's definitely elements from the Grant side to an extent where there's some like really bizarre humor and like the way that some of the characters speak, particularly the couple, that you can totally see that like Judge Dredd British influence. And then Bisley is just going nuts. Just takes the story to the next level. There are some really cool. Obviously, the gore is crazy when he's fighting the elves, and the fight with Santa is pretty cool. But there's also splash pages of Lobo just looking like a freaking badass. He's got a really cool looking motorcycle. This is a Christmas classic, and people who are intrigued by this, there are 2 crossovers between Lobo and the Authority, published years later, like a decade after this, and those are kind of loose sequels to this. But we read a Lobo story in one of DC's. Was that a Christmas special too? I don't think so. It was some dumb like death metal thing. But there was a Tom King Lobo story which I didn't like. I actually hated it, and you can watch a previous episode on our channel, in our feed about that. But this shows how cool Lobo actually was, and I think he has a really, bad, an unfair reputation. People think he was like 90s cringe, and I think this is genius.
Lobo has his moments for me, just like Deadpool has his moments for me. This was certainly wild, and it ticks those boxes for, well, that certainly was what I expected, but in its own weird and messed up way per se. But no, I really I enjoyed it because it's just crazy and exactly what you'd expect from Lobo, but at the same time not exactly what you'd expect because it goes far above and beyond what your imagination could soar to. But the Simone Bisley art is amazing. Like, it's very, 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 very good. So it's at least worth a flip through. But yeah, I do think Lobo gets a bad rap as well, Vince. I think when used in the right way, he's great. But overexposure kills anything that's just good enough for the time being, at least in my opinion. Which is the same thing that that has happened to other characters. For example, Deadpool, though the comparison between them is not very similar at all in character, but definitely in their exposure. So I'll go to Flash Volume 2, number 73, which is Mark Waid and Greg LaRocque. And Wally and Linda are spending the holidays with Jay and Joan, and Jay has to get Wally out of the house as he's too riddled with energy and is starting to annoy Joan, as Wally keeps asking to help set up the Christmas tree, and is the tree okay and everything. So Joan is just like, you have to get him out of the house. So the issue just kind of becomes a montage of them helping around the city while they talk about the holidays and what the holidays mean as you get older. Wally is adjusting that Christmas isn't really about wanting and getting gifts. He equates that to the wanting a new baseball mitt, and it's now more about friends and family. And currently, I think we're kind of all in the age range experiencing kind of what Wally's going through, where it's not really gifts every year anymore for us. It's more about seeing your family and friends when you get a time to see them. Obviously, this year none of that is happening, but but at least I can empathize with Wally how he experiences Christmas now. They end up having to save a pregnant woman who's like hysterical running through traffic and going into labor, and tells the Flashes that her husband's been roped into a scheme for stealing deposits as a department store Santa, which is very similar to the O'Neill and Miller Batman story. And this story is dedicated to Dennis O'Neill. So my immediately thoughts go to, is this their own riff on that? Because, the central, antagonist part of it is similar, but the other part's not so much. So Wally has to go and traverse this department store and he thinks it's going to be simple, but really it's super crowded and it's kind of a race against time. So he's got to, get in there and find the guy before the goons do. And of course, the Flash saves the day. And in the epilogue, they get a knock at the door. Oh, and Barry Allen has returned. This then, of course, kicks off the famous and celebrated return of Barry Allen's story. So this is a very, very good issue of the Mark Waid era Flash.
I think one of my favorite things that I sometimes forget about Wally, and I'm not sure if I'm basing it almost solely off of this issue, but I just really like that Wally's just like really into Christmas.
Yeah,
then absolutely
because he's next to and spending it with Jay, who's kind of basically a surrogate father figure to him, but also like he knows how Barry looked up to Jay, and of course he looks up to him the same way. He wants to make sure everything's perfect, so he can't ever like he's always antsy. As you're now spending it with your idol, who is now also your partner, which is kind of a fun dynamic that Wally and Jay have throughout that era of the Flash.
Yeah, and of course, I believe Jay gets him, or no, Linda got him the baseball mitt in the end, right?
He gets to experience Christmas, on both ends.
I think it's that and the sweater for Linda, I think, are a great example of how when you're younger, you just kind of like want these things because you're just like a kid and you want stuff, and like as you get older, you kind of you're still getting things, but like at least for me, like I want to give more, like I want to give gifts that like people can use or like have some like kind of meaning behind them. So here, Wally gets that baseball mitt he wanted, but realistically he's getting that feeling of getting the baseball mitt, and that's like the actual gift. And of course, he gets Linda the sweater and says, yeah, so I don't forget that conversation I totally didn't forget about for 10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they just got back together again, too. I think a couple issues ago is the one where he finally chases the train to make the decision. He's like, no, let's actually be together, because she gives him the ultimatum where she's going to leave, too. So, that's also, Wade laying the groundwork for what later becomes their marriage that happens also. But no, just a really, really good issue, and arguably, well, not arguably, it might be one of my favorite runs ever. I mean, I'll see where it is when I can finally read all of it in one chunk. But, sir, we'll go to you for DC Holiday Bash #2.
All right, so we got a classic Green Lantern, Green Arrow setup right here. I actually, just thinking about this now, probably should have seen if this was before or after the kind of follow-up Green Arrow, Green Lantern stories with Kyle and Connor that are collected in a trade called Emerald Allies. But so this little short story, it's following Kyle and Connor. Kyle has roped Connor into going last-minute Christmas shopping for some people in the JLA, and Connor, being raised a Buddhist, is just kind of like, why me? And Kyle just responds with, well, you were there. And it comes up later, but Connor does become a little bit confused at Christmas traditions and like buying people gifts. But as they get to the mall, a mall patron uses a demo supercomputer to hack into the mall's security system, and he gains control of the lights, the doors, and the air. Somehow, the mall is like completely sealed, and like they're worried about people running out of air, which I thought was a really odd thing, but whatever, minor point in the story. The hacker then grabs a gun off the wall of a store, and before he can use it, he is disarmed by the Emerald Allies, and he does eventually take a nun hostage. Connor drops some very great Buddhist wisdom about the impermanence of life, the inherent impermanent nature of life, and how, as humans, that kind of frustrates us because we want these things to be permanent, and like that's where his frustration's coming from, because his, I don't know, girlfriend dumped him for a sugar daddy or something or another. And I'm still not really sure if Connor was actually trying to teach and like help this guy, or he just wanted to distract him so he could get the knife. I guess maybe a little column A, little column B. But either way, diffuses the situation and, asks Kyle, why are you getting people gifts for Christmas? And Kyle responds, well, you want to, like, let them know, like, you're thinking of them and you appreciate their friendship with them or whatever. So Connor's just like, why don't you just, like, pull them aside and tell them that? And obviously Kyle just laughs off, and then they go shopping. And that's the story.
No, I liked it. I like the Kyle and I just had a complete lapse of a train of thought. The Kyle and Connor pairing, I think, is really fun. That Emerald Allies trade is a fun one if you can track it down. It's a definite trade, but no, they're fun together. In the same way, different way that Hal and Ollie are fun together.
You kind of invert the dynamic with them, which I think was the initial point, at least in bringing them back together. I don't think it was necessarily the point when Connor and Kyle were respectively created, but you also kind of have them like move forward with the times. Like 20 years passes in between like the original Green Arrow, Green Lantern, Green Arrow, and then these guys.
Right. And then I enjoy Kyle a lot too. He's also low key one of my more favorite characters. So whenever you get to see him, and this is the era where he was the Green Lantern, so it's always nice to see him pop up. But Dan, you're going to talk to us about the Spectre?
Yes. So this was my all-read book that I requested all of my co-hosts to read alongside with me, and I think it was a good choice, honestly. Not really expected, but anyways, we'll get into it. Our next issue here is Spectre Volume 3, number 26, written by John Ostrander with art by John Ridgway. So our issue opens to Jim Corrigan, Spectre, recalling his first fight with Asmodeus, as he then quickly realized that he was the Spectre after 20 years of being a cop. So kind of get a little bit of recap to start off our issue, which I think is probably the slowest part of this issue, to be honest, before we get into our actual story for this issue here. Jim then stops by to talk to a priest in a church, where the priest tells Jim that he wants nobody murdered on Christmas Eve. Easier said than done, I guess, unfortunately. So Spectre then sees a gang of kids kill this man and decides to transfer the pain of the man into the kids, but then finds out that the kids will also die by morning. So Spectre now has a bigger issue on his hands. He realizes that there are just too many people trying to kill, and we really see a pretty cool splash page of him kind of like, with his face in frustration, seeing all of the like other people in New York trying to kill other people and violence and stuff breaking out. So really cool splash page there by Ridgway. So instead, Spectre decides that he wants to try to enter the body of every person in New York so that they can anticipate their actions. That obviously doesn't work either, and Spectre obviously can't take it. So that's kind of, I guess, what that splash page was alluding to, actually, now that I think about it. So he goes back to the church. We find out the man that was shot attends mass with his family. So I guess he's like temporarily alive for the moment, and he goes to mass with his family, as well as the gang kids. The one that shot the man, he actually goes to confess his sins to the priest, who then asks Spectre to spare his life. The next morning, the man is healed fully, no gun wound or anything like that. The kid who shot him is forgiven, and the other gang members are reborn as. I'm sorry, I sneezed on camera. I was trying to hold it back as much as I could. The other gang members are reborn as babies. So that's a little strange, but overall, this was a pretty surprising issue for me. I really enjoyed it. I'm really sorry. What did you guys think? I'll mute myself so you guys can talk.
I'm surprised you chose this, because I would not have penned you as someone that was going to choose a Spectre story in like 100 years. But wow, John Ostrander is really good, and I feel is currently more underrated in venues now. He's really, I think, overlooked in how great of a writer he was. Outside of just his prolific work on Suicide Squad, but even his work going forward on Star Wars titles into the 2000s, he was still always really, really good. Guest artist John Ridgway's pencils I also thought were really great here, and then Todd Klein's letters are also really superb, I found. So yeah, when Dan chose this, I was curious. I was like, he's picking a Spectre story, and this is definitely a character he isn't really familiar with, but also a Spectre Christmas story in itself is weird and enticing. So this is a total like win-win. And I was like, I didn't know what I was going to get, but I definitely enjoyed it.
So I believe this is the first solo Spectre comic I've ever read, and like I'm generally familiar with the character, but it was interesting to see him operate solo like in his own book, and especially as Mike was just saying, like in the context of a Christmas story, because if you're at all familiar with the Spectre and then you say like, oh yeah, there's a Christmas story with this starring the Spectre, you kind of like your thought is like what happens in it,
Yeah.
and I don't know what I would have expected, but I think this fits the bill pretty well. I particularly thought Spectre's development, like just in the issue, was kind of fascinating. Just how he goes from just generic spirit of vengeance and like very literal to over the course of the issue, like learning to find compassion again. And I'm kind of curious. Ostrander's Spectre run is something I'd like to read at some point if I can ever track all the issues down and everything. Just like is this like, does this kind of character arc going from like vengeful to learning more human traits, like does it happen every issue? Is this more of like the entire arc of like the entire like overarching thing of his entire run? Is it like just here for whatever odd reason? So overall, very good.
Yeah, it's an interesting story because obviously, modern day Christmas, we all live in the United States in 2020, so Christmas is very much a cultural holiday as well, and frankly, a commercial one. But obviously, Christmas, it's a Christian holiday, sort of. There's some asterisks there, but oddly, this is definitely, I think, the most religious story we read, which makes sense given that the Spectre is, literally connected to God. Um, but yeah, this is pretty cool, and it is a great example of the Ostrander Spectre run, and Tom Mandrake, great on, or no, this is John Ridgway. So the similar to Starman, this is a guest artist. The regular artist for the series was Tom Mandrake, who I think does some of the like horror aspects of Spectre really well. The Asmodeus stuff that Dan was mentioning, they're making direct references, but traditionally this is more of a Marvel thing. But they totally could have put footnotes here to showcase number 60, which is way back, Earth 2 / World War II era, not getting too much into continuity. And then earlier issues of this series, like around the teens and 20s of teens. And then I think a couple issues before this, as referenced. And I love that the hospital is named for Jerry Siegel and Bernard Bailey, the creators of the character. And now our next story, mine, this is very quick. This is a story from the second issue of Holiday Bash. And this is written and drawn by Ty Templeton. And it's just a hilarious 2-pager of Santa Claus delivering coal to Darkseid on Apocalypse. He has to weave through all of the defense systems and assault troops and everything, and it gets there every year. And I just love this so much. This is up there with Hellboy's Pancakes as far as a 2-page story. Very snappy. It's essentially like a joke. And this is the best way to use these 1-page or 2-pagers is do it in a punchline kind of setup. You don't have enough room for a 3-act structure, but you can do something similar to like a setup punchline. And because this is so short and hilarious and Christmas and Darkseid and Santa Claus, this is passed around the internet all the time. It's constantly reposted on sites like Reddit. So you can easily track this down through extra legal means, and also DC probably doesn't care. It's 2 pages. It probably barely reprinted this anywhere anyways. So definitely read this if you haven't already.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. Yeah, this is endlessly shared, so I expect to see it at least a few times in the next weeks to months here. That you chose it. I do. This isn't the story we're talking about. I don't know if you flipped the rest of the issue, but obviously we're big fans of Ty Templeton, and he's on my list of guys that never got enough work because I just love his art. But and I think in Holiday Bash too, there's also a JSA story drawn by Rick Burchett. I don't know if you saw that. I just wanted to quickly get your thoughts on just the look of that, because it looks really great as well as this one does.
I didn't actually get to it, but I think honestly, the bigger surprise for me is I believe that story is written by Howard Chaykin, which is an interesting combo. But I'll have to read that as well.
Yeah, so that just the Holiday Bash 2 is probably going to be, I'll probably track down all three of them, but Holiday Bash 2 in particular might be one I really want to try to find for putting away in my own personal collection. Then I'll go in for DC Batman. Well, not DC Adventures. Batman Adventures Holiday Special from 1995, and I chose the Joker story for this, which really is in two parts. Part one is Paul Dini and Bruce Timm on story, and then Kevin Altieri and Butch Lukic on art, with Glenn Murakami on colors. And then part two is Dan Reba on art, still Dini on the story, and then colors is by Bruce Timm. So this is, two stories that connect to each other in the holiday special, and was one of the shorts that was adapted for the Holiday Nights episode of the new Batman Adventures, or Batman Animated Series season 4, whatever you want to look at it. It's the one where the characters got redesigned. That's the easy differential here. So the stories are in this titled "What Are You Doing New Year's Eve?" and then "Should Old Acquaintances Be Forgot?" And the Joker has interrupted Gotham's televisions, announcing that he's got a special surprise for Gotham, and he's thrown a party for New Year's. And Batman and Gordon discover that he's stolen a sonic boom bomb, and he'll detonate it at midnight. So Batman has to go and stop him. We get these great creative, 6-page, 6-panel layout of the countdown happening as Batman is going to stop the Joker in the middle of Gotham Square. And then, of course, he does by dropping a giant bell on him that contains the Joker and the bomb inside. So he's able to do away with that. Just really, really great expressive color in both of these stories. Glenn Murakami, of course, would go on to become a director, but also was he provided art for the shows as well. Everyone who worked on the shows looks like did something for this issue, which is kind of neat to see. Particularly Dan Reba for part 2. Which is the part where Batman and Gordon go meet in a diner on New Year's Eve, and they have coffee, and of course Batman beats him to the check and then sneaks out the classic Batman move. But Dan Reba I know more as a director of episodes and not an artist, so that was cool to see his pencils here, and then with Bruce Timm's colors. So it is kind of it's the same but different in very slightly different ways. But reading it synced up with the episode was kind of a neat experience for me that I experimented with. Obviously I don't think any of you did that, but it did provide for a different way of reading it, because it's one of the few that are like straight up adapted for whether it animation word for word, which is a rarity too. So it's just an interesting experiment looking at it on that front, but also just a really good I think Batman Joker story for the holidays. The whole issue is great too. It's definitely worth tracking down to have in your collection. The other ones that they adapted for this, the Harley and Ivy story and then the Batgirl one, those three are all on Holiday Nights, while the Mr. Freeze one was left out. But also interesting to note, this is our only non-Christmas themed story here. It's our only New Year's one. So I also thought, in that respect, this was also different here. But no, this is pretty much perfect, and all-star work from the top tier people that were part of BTAS.
Yeah, the whole issue here is great. I did want to give further shout out to that Harley and Ivy story, which has a really unique art style. All the art is pretty close to the show, but there's slight differences. And anyone who's a fan of the Harley and Ivy relationship, total must read. And then I want to call attention to Jim Gordon ordering a cheesesteak in Gotham. And as a Philadelphian, I was like, But granted, my headcanon, based on extensive research and attempting to make a literal map of the DC universe, I have the city in southern New Jersey on the Delaware Bay. So it's actually kind of not too far-fetched for Gordon to be ordering a cheesesteak. It wouldn't, geographically, it's not too much further than Dan ordering a cheesesteak from where he lives. So I'm not too offended as a Philadelphian.
I order cheesesteaks where I live. I mean, it goes all over the state.
That's too far. That's not legitimate.
I'm gonna have to agree with Vince on this one.
I think you guys are insane, considering that the best cheesesteak was not only a few years ago was voted in Pittsburgh. So you guys build that back up here for that. So I think cheesesteaks are universal. Obviously, they're best in Philly, and you're never going to meet the quality of a Philadelphia cheesesteak, but cheesesteaks are accepted anywhere, and cheesesteaks are for everyone because
I want to.
Oh, I accept people buying them and eating them, outside of Philadelphia, outside of Pennsylvania.
If anything, I want more cheesesteak, coverage in my Batman comics. Like, I want to know if Bruce is a provolone or a whiz guy. Like, we need to know that.
Do we all want to share if we're
I feel
provolone?
like he's definitely not a whiz guy.
I'm a whiz guy.
Yeah, I'm whiz. So
I
Dan's
will
not.
certainly...
Dan doesn't eat cheesesteaks, and that's a story for another time.
Oh,
That's
good
an
God.
all-time great story.
Regular cheese on
That
it.
is a fantastic story. But to answer the original question, I am a whiz guy, though I am perfectly happy with... I would prefer American over provolone, but that's just me being weird with cheeses.
That
Provolone
is
is
very
so excellent.
American cheese is plastic.
Yeah.
You think Bruce would have Alfred cook him up a cheesesteak and it would be like Wagyu beef, and then he'd have like truffles and gold flakes?
No, I think
I don't think he'd go that
Bruce
far.
strikes me as someone who would throw mushrooms in it and completely ruin it.
I guess I'm kind of basing on the exaggerated lobster thermidor from the Lego movie, where it kind of had Bruce come off as a food snob, but also I think he microwaved his lobster thermidor.
He did. I don't know. I don't think Bruce pays attention that much to his food. Obviously, he has the money to buy lavish food, and Alfred, of course, is the one doing all the buying. Because there's that moment in Batman Returns, at least, where he gives him soup and he's freaking out that it's cold, and he's like, Alfred's like, if that soup's supposed to be cold. So I don't think really he pays attention much to it because he's more important, skulking and brooding around the Batcave. But I don't know. I enjoyed our cheesesteak discussion on this holiday themed episode.
I did not, because now I really just want a cheesesteak. Probably won't be able to get one for like 2 or 3 days. Oh well. Next issue up is Spider-Man's Tangled Web number 21 by the absolutely amazing Darwin Cook, who's writing and drawing. It is entitled "'Twas the Fight Before Christmas." So, just to get into it a little bit before delving into a bit of the plot, really good issue, especially the art, and on top of that, I don't know, spoilers for the thing I'm about to tell you the plot of anyway. The Fantastic Four are fairly prominent, and by God, just every page with one of them or all of them in it is absolutely amazing, just especially. But I'm gonna be honest, I thought the plot was just a little bit weak and kind of a little too meandering, or just not focused on the right things in a way. To give a bit of the structure of the issue itself, there is a one-page kind of prologue or expository page where it's just a lot of text and some pictures just for whatever line of text explaining, Pete is at a holiday party for the Bugle or whatever. Jameson sends him out to get a crystal unicorn for his wife, and it's the worst snowstorm in history or whatever. Pete happens upon a group of kids who just didn't get on their bus back home for whatever reason or something or another. So he takes them back to the Bugle, leaves them there, and then goes out again, and that's where the story actually picks up. And then additionally, there's a one-page epilogue, which is told in captions and then kind of paneled as Christmas ornaments on a tree, which is a very cool page. But I felt like a lot of this kind of prologue in a way and epilogue stuff would have fit better if it was actually within the story itself and with the more traditional panel and everything for comic books. But to delve into the plot a bit, like I already mentioned with the beginning stuff, we pick up, Pete goes out in the snowstorm. He brings back a bunch of Spidey action figures for the kids, which, mildly infuriates Jameson, who was also already kind of infuriated that there's children in his office. But we then cut to the Fantastic Four, where hilariously Ben Grimm has gotten Johnny the same Spider-Man action figure, and Johnny's just like, why does this guy get an action figure? Where's a Human Torch action figure? But we go on to find Reed trying to find Medusa for Crystal, who is just missing, I guess. I'm not sure if this connects to anything else in the Marvel Universe at the time, but Crystal's looking for Medusa. And kind of to, I guess, to take their mind off of it a little bit, or otherwise, Janet Van Dyne shows up and takes Sue Storm and Crystal shopping at this one mall. This mall also happens to be the place where Flash Thompson is dressing up as Spidey in kind of a mall Santa deal, except it's a mall Spider-Man. And of course, this also happens to be where the mysterious villain shows up. But we get into just some great scenes of them shopping. There's, like a couple of sight gags, a couple of, funny things. The one thing that sticks out to me is apparently Franklin asks for a Fantastic Four like action figure set for Christmas, and Sue's just like, I don't know how I feel about buying my son action figures of his family to play with. That seems kind of weird. And they keep bringing it up that whoever made the action figures made Sue's butt just like ginormous in the action figure for whatever reason. But we go back to Pete, who has once again ventured out into the snow to try and get this crystal unicorn for JJ's wife. Of course, he ends up at the same mall, where at this point, Medusa is attacking the mall patrons as well as Flash Spidey. And luckily, of course, there were already heroes there, so people are fighting and such. Spider-Man finds out that once like they kind of get knocked out or like get hit really hard, they just kind of get released from whatever mind control is happening. So just as Spidey defeats Medusa, Johnny, Reed, and someone else. Oh god, I forgot who else showed up. Yeah, Reed, Ben, and Johnny show up to and like get in a minor altercation with Spider-Man before realizing what had happened, which was a little odd to me. I kind of thought at this point in time the Fantastic Four would like know Spider-Man a lot better, but I guess maybe not. This might go back to the thing earlier with the Marvel Team Up issue where I thought they were, closer than they were at this point in time. I don't know. But it's revealed that the Puppet Master was behind everything, and he goes to jail. And through the epilogues I mentioned earlier, I forgot to mention, of course, in true J. Jonah Jameson style, he brings the kids to the mall to show them Spider-Man ruining Christmas, which is a kind of funny little thing. But in the epilogues, it's shown, amongst other things, that MJ, who was not in this issue at all because her flight back to New York had to stop in Philly, going back to cheesesteaks, I guess. And she was stuck there, but through somehow J. Jonah Jameson arranged for her to get to New York in this ridiculous snowstorm, which was a nice little gift to Peter. Additionally, at the request of Ben, Alicia visits her dad, Puppet Master, in jail, and Black Bolt is given a chainsaw for Christmas. And that's just kind of, it ends. This was the book I chose everyone to read, so what did you guys think?
I really liked it. Obviously, the art, like you said, pretty much just takes it away. A few little details to go over. I feel like every time Medusa's on one of these pages, I feel like she just really takes over the page, and that's really cool. I mean, you really get to see Darwin Cook's art just on display there with her hair, and I really like that part of this issue. There's also times too, I don't know if you mentioned it in your synopsis, but like there's times where like Spidey has like the little dots on his eyes,
Mhm.
and that kind of harkens back to like I think Amazing Fantasy 15 when he actually like when he sees the robber that killed Uncle Ben, he has like those little dots on his eyes from that issue. So kind of cool. It adds a little bit extra level of expression for Spidey during some of these scenes. But yeah, this was a great choice, and always good to see more Darwin Cook art.
Yeah, it's a more different style for Darwin Cook. It's much more cartoony and playful than per se, New Frontier would be to analyze the both of those. Much more of like kind of a chibi looking Spider-Man as well.
Yeah,
But no, it's still great. The colors are great too.
to me, it, like you're saying, it's definitely a bit more cartoony, but it almost feels like a cartoony Jack Kirby, especially with the Fantastic Four stuff.
Yeah, I wanted to get into that. It's funny you mentioned that because I think he's trying to do a Kirby-like thing, and Vince will definitely correct me or see his thoughts on this. But as the book goes on, we get a lot more, panel layouts where just 4 panels in the page, which is closer to what the end of Jack's run on Fantastic Four would be, where he was really just doing either splashes or just 4 panels for his last few issues. And I felt like maybe he was trying to do something like that here, because there's kind of that going on near the end of this. But no, I enjoyed it, but I didn't really enjoy the story, and I think that's more chalked up to I don't really know the continuity or status of what's going on in Tangled Web, because I know it's kind of its own thing. So, but I came here for Darwin Cook, and I got more than I wanted in the art in itself always.
Yeah, I have a couple scatterbrain thoughts. I'm not sure about the Kirby thing, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was looking at reference and inspired by that, since it is Fantastic Four centric. Tangled Web is an anthology book, so every issue. I mean, there are a couple things that are arcs, but everything is totally separate. They're all light on continuity, but some of them you can try and slot it in here. I guess this one is like ambiguously like 60s, 70s era Spidey, based on the Bugle setup and everything like that. I think. I guess 70s. I don't know, because obviously MJ's here. The Philly reference is nice because Mary Jane Watson is a Pennsylvania girl. She's from Montoursville, and but I think she grew up in Pittsburgh, I believe. And you can dive through our Clone Saga podcast somewhere in some episode. There's in-depth discussion about that. And then as far as the actual visuals, the main difference here is that in some of Cook's work, including this, he's inked by Jay Bone. So that's the slight difference from full 100% Cook on New Frontier. But obviously Cook was very versatile as well, so a lot of it could be still just on him, because obviously his Parker stuff drastically different looking from New Frontier, even that different looking from Batman Ego, et cetera, et cetera. He comes from animation, so like honestly, in a certain alternate timeline, there's a chance that he could have had a story in that Batman holiday special. But so he is versatile with his art. I think this issue, in my notes I wrote it's a fucking masterpiece, but like I do kind of agree with you guys on the plotting and the pacing and stuff. It feels like, I don't know, I don't really know how to describe it. The pacing is a little bit weird, and sometimes it kind of seems like we just kind of like jump to random characters, and a lot of the conversations don't have much to do with the story. But it kind of, in a sense though, it kind of does ground you, like we're gonna have this awkward, not awkward, we're gonna have this conversation over here between Jonah and this other Bugle reporter, and it has nothing to do with anything, but like there's some joke in it or something. So it adds to the overall experience. I think this is interesting because this issue, it kind of reminds me of like the classic like Pixar idea, or even a little bit past that, where you have a lot of mature jokes in here, not dirty or anything like that, not like Lobo, but you have jokes that you have to know certain things to really pick up on. But obviously, not just from the art style, but overall, it can also function as an all ages book. And I enjoyed it as a dumb child, and I probably didn't get a lot of those jokes. I think the Sue Storm butt thing is funny because I'm 100% certain that Darwin is also intentionally drawing Sue's butt large in the actual issue, which I think is fun, similar to my Mark Beecham comments earlier. And as some of the pacing stuff is slightly explained because Darwin Cook also does the 11th issue of this series, and this one picks up on a lot of that. Like there are these two characters here I think they're named Jill and Kay. It's like the blonde woman who in this, I think she's in a Santa outfit. And then there's the Asian woman, and they're both like Bugle reporters or hanging around. And they're introduced in that, and these are literally their only appearances ever. So Darwin thought he had a cool Spider-Man character to add, and then they're just here. It's hard to find, and then here's the kind of, I think this is actually pretty interesting, and you guys might have thoughts on it. So it's hard to find full articles discussing this, which I think is weird. But my understanding, and you can find like this is actually a thing, is that Darwin Cook pitched, and I believe Marvel actually asked him to pitch an idea for an out of continuity all ages line, and he was going to curate it. He set up the foundation for it. Obviously, since it's Marvel, Spidey would be a centerpiece. I don't know precisely if it had gone forward this way, precisely how Cook would be involved as far as writing, drawing, who knows. But Axel Alonso / Marvel turned him down. And then, like literally moments later, not literally, they launched the Marvel Adventures line, initially called Marvel Age, and carried forward some of the concepts he did, but it wasn't the Darwin Cook all ages line, and obviously he was not involved at all. And that was basically, Cook took offense to that, and so he never did a single page, as far as I can tell. There may be one exception very late in his career, but he never worked for Marvel after 2003, all because of that. And these two issues of Tangled Web, I feel, are probably the closest that we ever got to that. And obviously, I actually think the Marvel Adventures books, particularly Spider-Man, are really underrated and pretty cool. But obviously, I totally would have loved, tons of more Darwin Cook, even if it's just writing and, on Marvel characters.
Yeah. I have a Marvel Adventures Spider-Man book sitting under my desk that I just remembered.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I hate the typeface for those Adventures books, but I agree that there's some gems in there. But you brought up Pixar, and I do feel, at least in the color palette, this is kind of what you'd get if, let's say, Pixar ever took a stab at adapting any Marvel thing. Obviously, I think you wouldn't get like the big head, small body that you see here, but at least in like the color palette, at least reminds me of more, inside out, onwards, style of Pixar's worlds. I do think that is also an interesting thing to bring up. But Dan, we're gonna visit Lil Gotham.
Yes, Lil Gotham. Our next issue is Lil Gotham number 3, written by Derek Friedolfs, with art by Dustin Nguyen. So it's Christmas time in Gotham as the city gathers to light the Christmas tree. Bruce finds out from Gordon that the orphanage that does the Christmas carols is missing. The kids are missing. They're not at the lighting ceremony. So Bruce heads off to find where they are. He tracks them down to find that the kids are in a snow globe created by Mr. Freeze. Wow. Nightwing talks Freeze off the ledge, if you will, towards hurting these kids by telling him that he can be useful for other things, such as being a Zamboni rider, a circus act, or even an ice cream man. So Freeze lets the two heroes save the kids, as he is then brought back to, I guess, presumably Arkham Asylum, where he hears the kids caroling outside of his prison cell. So very short little story here, but I thought it was cute. The art was interesting by Dustin Nguyen. I thought it was kind of like watercolor or paint. It looked like, I'm not sure exactly what type of medium he was using, but I thought it was interesting. 'Cause some of the texture he gave, like Batman, and the reflections he used on his mask, I thought were interesting and like kind of unique design there. But this is a pretty cool issue. Nothing too complicated going on here. I'm not sure if anyone else read this one, but it's worth a little read, I guess.
It is not safe taking those kids into Gotham to carol for Mr. Freeze.
That's true.
It's Arkham, I should say. I think I said Gotham.
Oh yeah.
I mean, potato there.
True.
I prefer Dustin Nguyen's more regular style with his work with Paul Dini on things like Heart of Hush and Streets of Gotham, but I've never really explored Lil Gotham. This was, by the way, if in case you're wondering, this was the third issue of the online, because this is an online book. It was a digital first book and then got printed in regular issues. So that issue 3 is really would have been in the first printed issue. This is the number 3 in terms of the digital editions we're talking about here, in case you're wondering. But yeah, I flipped through it, and of course it looks great and it's cute and only the way he does is it's still his signature style, but just in a different form, which I've always kind of thought was neat. It doesn't really deviate that much, but also it's completely different in its own way. But our final holiday tale is DC Holiday Bash 3 for Robin. There's a 4-page story by Chuck Dixon and Gordon Purcell titled Alone for the Holidays. And it's Tim Drake out on patrol for Christmas Eve, and Bruce is out of town, and so is his father. So he's all alone for Christmas, and he's in a pretty down mood. He can't see and hang out with Steph. I think they're broken up at this point. So he's just totally alone. That is until he gets a message from Oracle to, hey, meet her at the clock tower, where he's met by Nightwing, Babs, and Alfred, and Harold. So he does have all these people to spend the holidays with. And he's like, oh, yeah, I can hang out with you guys. And that's it. Weird, because technically this is 99, so shouldn't No Man's Land be going on right now? I don't know exactly where this place is, because when we did do the No Man's Land show, we get the first meeting between Tim and Barbara, face to face, physically, not just through a computer screen in that series. The first time he, meets her at the clock tower. So I guess this would have to take place after that. Just, I guess, don't think too hard. DC's continuity is already broken enough, but this was fine. This was like a small, like I said, 4 pages. It was fun. It was, short and to the point.
Yeah, this gave me a headache because again, we did a No Man's Land show, and this is published basically right during the Road to part of it, but there's no reference to the earthquake, and I'm you said it, but I'm almost 100% certain that in No Man's Land is the first face-to-face appearance meeting of Tim and Babs, which I thought was weird.
We talked about that.
Yeah, which I thought was insane when I read No Man's Land that it was that late. But
yeah,
that's either happened already and they're just not referencing the earthquake and the fact that the city should be totally destroyed, or this is after No Man's Land but being published right in the middle of it. It doesn't really matter. The actual story, I mean, to be honest, I thought this was one of the more pedestrian things we read for the show. This is pretty much, this is what you'd I mean, it is Chuck Dixon and on Robin, so there is some some significance to it, but this is what you'd expect. When you get an anthology, Christmas, holiday special or any kind of theme special, it's always going to be like a 80-20 rule, and this is really, I would put this in the 80 category of like, it's fun when you read the whole thing at once, but like, I don't think this is super special.
No, it's not. It's 4 pages and it does what it needs to do. It fills the rest of the holiday bash, essentially, for what it does. But, gentlemen, that's it. We've done it. We've completed the holiday special for 2020, and this is our final show of 2020. So we'll, anything else to wrap up things or say? I'm not going to do picks of the week for this because I don't feel like it's really applicable. I think it would be stupid to do that. But obviously, regular shows will be back in 2021, and I'm sure we'll hit the ground running with there. We already have more big major books running through that already. But also, thank you to Ginger Dan for joining us, being our guest for this holiday special, completing the box that we're now inside of on the screen here for us tonight. But no, that's it. All I've got. Unless you have any other thoughts, I thought these are all pretty good. There's not one of these I didn't enjoy from the ones I did read. So
yeah, I don't think there was anything particularly bad. Just kind of like Vince was saying earlier, just like a certain amount fall into they're just fine. they're nice to read at this time, but like nothing special. And then there's a handful that are just exceptionally good. But after reading all of these, I just, what's up with department store and mall Santas robbing the place? Like, how common of an occurrence is this?
It's an easy scapegoat, clearly, for a DC holiday story.
Yeah.
And also, it looks like from like the choices we had, it's predominantly DC versus Marvel when it came down to the choices too. I did think that was a little bit more interesting, but yeah, no indies, really just Marvel, DC. But I think that's just because Vince didn't bother to look for indies, which
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, I'll just say, as far as good versus bad, I will just say you guys, the two of you, didn't read Fantastic Four. But
yeah,
but yeah, I mean, it was just based on what we chose, and we kind of came into it. I think there is a general, I think DC generally does a little bit more holiday things, but obviously we chose a bunch of stories from just these 3 issues of Holiday Bash, and it's just kind of where the dice landed. I mean, Marvel had an annual holiday special from probably like 91 through like 96, and then obviously they've had ones scattered through since then. So there's definitely a bunch more Marvel stories that we could have read, and there's a lot of real good gems in there. But it's just what we landed on. And yeah, the thing is, I'm not really sure. Like, I feel like you'd have to think hard about an indie book. Like, I don't know that many indie books do, holiday stories. I'm sure there's like 1 or 2 issues of very long running books, like maybe Invincible has some Christmas moment, or something like that. There are some Disney books that I had in the lineup, but we've already read some of the Duck books for retro shows and stuff like that.
we read one of them, and it was a pick of the week for you and me. So we did have success on the Duck books. I was surprised you didn't choose one of them. I thought you'd sneak another one in there.
I was tempted, but actually, I believe the best holiday themed Duck books are actually like surprisingly long. So like most of the Scrooge and Donald Duck stories from the classic era, they're all in like different lengths. So there are like, some of them are 2-page stories, some of them are like 12-page stories, and then you have like these 38-page, like full-length epics. And the freaking Lobo issue is like 40 plus pages already. So
46 pages.
I wanted to kind of spread the love and pick a couple things, but I was really tempted by one of the Scrooge stories. I actually think that there's a certain Scrooge story. I forget which one, because there's like Christmas in Shacktown and something Christmas on Bear Mountain. There's a bunch of them, but one of them is like really, really fantastic.
Yeah. Well, maybe if we do this format next year, you'll be able to fit it in. Not saying that we will. Who knows what we'll be doing this time next year. But thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. And I guess we'll see you guys all in 2021 for more new comic reviews as scheduled per regular basis. And stay safe, continuing to celebrate the holidays. And we'll see you in 2021.